So, major breakthrough, the first turning, fire and language. Now that worked great, took care of humans for about 200,000 years. But then they started leaving Africa. They probably started leaving Africa after only about 75 or 100,000 years of working with fire. But as more and more hunter-gathering groups, that was the primary mode. We didn't know about agriculture. That was unknown. We hunted what we could find. We gathered what we could find. Typically, women and children were in charge of the gathering, finding seeds and nuts and roots. That produced about 80 to 90% of our calories. And men were in charge of the hunting, about 10 to 20% of our calories. And one of the major things that you eat is seeds. And a very common form of seed is grass seeds. They're small, but grass often grows in big fields. So you can gather lots and lots of them and you can fill your belly on it. We're still doing that with cereal. So as the hunter-gatherer groups began to bottleneck around the Mediterranean, because remember, if you're trying to get out of Africa, there's this big obstacle, the Mediterranean Sea, right? And if you want to get farther north, you're going to be forced up to the kind of bottleneck, which is roughly where Egypt is, Israel is, really ground zero for the Middle East. And again, this has been a center point again and again and again in world history. So as humans began to bunch up there, hunting and gathering didn't work. There were too many people hunting, too many people gathering, no animals, no plants. People were starving, they were getting sick, they're fighting with each other. Now that could have been the end. That could have led to a massive drop in our population. We figured out what seeds can do. And this ushered in the second turning. After harnessing fire, learning how to germinate seeds is the next major paradigm shift. Because keep in mind, if you're a hunter-gatherer, the last thing you want is for your seeds to fall in the ground, much less get buried in it. You want to eat them before other animals or bugs get to them. The idea of putting a seed in the dirt and waiting and watching and maybe giving it a little water, and look what happens. That one grain of wheat, which was the type of grass, turns into 35 to 50. Now, plant those, you got 2,500. Plant those a couple more times, you got millions of grains. And the result was that in a fairly short time, as people began to figure out how to do this, all of a sudden, many more people, groups of hundreds, instead of just tens or dozens, hundreds could live in a very small area. So instead of having to travel all the time, moving all the time, traveling light because you don't want to carry a lot of stuff, all of a sudden you could stay in the same place. And these groups began to grow to hundreds, and finally they began to become thousands of people all living in the same area, and a new communication issue arose. Just as fire, very dangerous if you don't have a way to communicate about it, thousands of people living together, sharing tons of grain, trying to do that all by just word of mouth. Ever played the game of telephone, right? It gets chaotic pretty quickly. This led to writing. And the first writing was just about how much grain there was and who it belonged to and who it went to. Because the ability to feed was the ability to rule. And within a very short amount of time, again, now we're coming up to the beginning of the Mayan calendar, about 3000 BCE, you begin to see the first cities around the eastern end of the Mediterranean, cities of Egypt and also the Sumer. And there are only 3 or 4 of them, very, very small. They were an experimental modality. Human beings had been hunter-gatherers, always on the move, only living in groups of a couple of dozen at most, maybe 100 when there was tremendous bounty, but generally moving all the time in small groups. All of a sudden you have groups of several thousand staying in one place, building walls. And then this is where we begin to see the first pyramids or ziggurats getting built. We see the first kings and armies and slaves and the first writing. Again, which started with recording grain supplies, but pretty quickly moved on to history. We see the template for the way we live today. 5,000 years ago, there were 3 or 4 cities, each with a population of a few thousand. Now, we have over 10,000 cities, and they're inhabited by over 4 billion people, right? And their appetites are threatening the world's natural resources, and their waste products are engineering the 6th mass extinction. So, whoa, and again, 5,000 years, that's a long time sitting, listening to a video, but it's a finger snap when you're talking about the evolution of a species or the development of any biological form. So, an incredible breakthrough in the face of terrible danger. got us through the next 5,000 years, and it's led to computers, fossil fuels, AI, all kinds of amazing stuff. But it's also put us on the brink of extinction. My point is that humans have been here before, being endlessly tormented by the threat of big cats. And as you know, if you've ever been the victim of violence, it doesn't have to happen very many times for it to cast a huge shadow over your life. Big cats weren't killing every other human, but the memory of losing your mother, your grandmother, your cousin's mother, seeing the body dragged away, hearing the screams, very traumatic, was a huge driver to figure out about fire, again, which scared all the other animals. And inventing fire, it forced us to develop language. And all of a sudden, we're Homo sapiens. We're shamans. We're free to populate the planet. And again, that was great for about 200,000 years until we began jamming each other out, overpopulation, and that bottleneck leaving the Mediterranean. And again, it looked like bad news. Hunter-gathering was going to get us killed. Our best thinking was going to get us killed. But we stayed put and we figured out what seeds can do. And we listened to the wisdom of the plants. And pretty soon, in a very short time, we had radically transformed ourselves from pre-literate, nomadic people living in tiny groups to literate, urban people living in groups of thousands, which is really the template for how we live today. Do you not work in a pyramidally organized organization? We don't build a lot of pyramids anymore, but every organization I can think of is organized like a pyramid, right? And how do we negotiate? How do we make our way into the pyramid and up through it? With our skill with writing. And what are our major motivators? Wealth and status. Wealth was irrelevant to hunter-gatherers. You could only own as much as you could carry. And if you're moving all the time, you don't want to be carrying much. It wasn't until we became sedentary that accumulation began to become a goal. And then the more land you controlled, the more food you controlled, the more people you could dominate, the more people you could conquer, enslave, and the more wealth you could accumulate. That's a radical shift. It's only about 5,000 years old, which, considering we're a 200,000-year-old, 300,000-year-old species, that's a very short time. And it's only very recently that the majority of the planet live in cities, live in the urban second turning paradigm. And it's come to the end of its wear cycle. And if that's the best we can do, if that's our best thinking, we should be terrified every second. Because our best thinking, I mean, just look at the faster computers, AI, etc. What's happening? Is climate change getting any better? Are we burning less fossil fuels? No. In fact, AI is causing us to burn more fossil fuels, right? It's so paradoxical. So in any case, we're in a jam. The bottom line is, what are we? We are Homo sapiens. We are one who knows. We are shamans. We've been here before. And we need to quiet down, and we need to listen to nature. We need to trust our intuition and our imagination, and we need to find a completely different way of doing things. And believe me, it's going to look completely different. To animals, working with fire looks crazy. To hunter-gatherers, putting seeds in the ground looks insane. So what is it going to be? What is the third turning? What kind of behavior that looked insane is actually going to save us? So if you're curious, stay tuned for more episodes of Good News About the World Falling Apart. Please be sure to like, tell your friends, and if you're interested, feel free to buy the book. It's online. Good News About the World Falling Apart, The Third Turning of Human Consciousness. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.